had the rarest of rare things happen. Today it's a decent day outside. So I'm going to work like heck on this flap. Try to get this flap finished, if possible. I want to get this work done and maybe let the silver dry another day. Because Les is supposed to come over with the test plane, and I really am looking forward to getting two things done. Getting the new motors broken in and getting these mufflers tested both at the same time. Possibly get those two jobs done today. And maybe this weekend even getting some flights on our test plane. But for right now, and I'll do that again, I'll do this off camera because it's a redundant thing to the other side. I don't want to make this too repetitive, but get this flap done and hopefully get it done by the time Les is ready to come over, and hopefully have a couple of decent days in the near future. Now all the flaps are in place except for this clicking hinge that we have, and they are just about as free moving as I could ever expect. Most of the clearances are pretty good. The only thing I have to do now, maybe I'll start it while I'm waiting for Les because he's going to work on flaps today too, is I need to sand these down, put a little bit of a taper in them. I'm not going to get crazy. I want them to end about 1/8 of an inch, so I'm just going to take one side, each side, sand it down a little bit. It looks pretty cool when all these flaps come up into position. I hope that generates some lift. I guess we're going to find out. Hope we can get rid of that clicking hinge. Anyway, well, next step is I'll take the model apart, take the flaps off, and put a little bit of a taper in. I have a center line on everything. Again, there's a million ways to do this. Les has been using rods, blocks, whatever. In my case, I just want to put a little bit of a taper in each edge. And I can do that by hand. I want to leave as much material in the flap and just bring it to a taper at the tip. I'm trying to keep the flaps as stiff as possible. Step one. Make sure, boy, we got a lot of goop on the table already. See, if I don't scrape the table, what happens? There's glue and epoxy and whatever. But I need the edge of the table right now. Scrape it, clean it up real good. I'm going to try to put a little bit of a taper in the flaps. And one of the ways I've had luck doing that, now keep in mind, I don't want to make a V-shaped flap. I want to have a flap that just has a little bit of taper in the end. So I've got a center line down each side. We've already got the hinge pockets in the way we've always done it. I want to take a piece of 1/8 inch tape, just run it right down the line. Right down the edge. This gives us the edge that I'm looking for. Again, if you're looking, like Les's flaps have a high taper in them. I've found that, and I think Al Raby was in agreement, that the thinner the flaps could be, the better the plane, the better the lift it would make. And since with this plane with so many semi-scale features, we want to get the most lift we can out of this wing, that's for sure. Now what I did, I have the tape right down the middle. And what I do is I just block sand, holding this on the edge. Let me get my big block out. Let me get this up nice and close so you can see this. Of course, with the bigger block, smaller block, get out of here. I want to use the edge of the table, and I'm not trying to taper up here. Keep in mind, what I'm trying to do is just put a little bit of a taper toward the end. And I can use the rough side to get me real close to the tape. See how close I am? And because I'm using the edge of the table, this would work on any plane that has sheet flaps. And I don't want to make it any thinner than the 1/8 inch tape. I'm just trying to work my way right down. Okay, now I'm probably within a 1/64 of an inch of the tape. Now I'm switching over to the soft side of the block, making sure I keep it right on the edge of the table. Oh, that's nice. I'm right up to the tape, but not on it. I bet I could go keep the dust, so I can probably go another couple of thousandths right at the edge. Okay, now I am touching the tape, almost touching it. I'll take a block that has finer grit, and I'll just do the tips by hand, working toward the center line. And this is all I want to do to these flaps. I don't want to make these any thinner than I have to, and I don't want to have them like a triangle shape. I'd like them to be as flat as possible. And just have that little airfoil paper toward the end. Oh yeah. Okay, now the trick, obviously I'll do it off camera, just flip it over and do the other side. And we'll have a tapered flap. Do it 4 times and we'll be done. Thing is I took the tape off and just bring this radius down, try to get it right to the center line, but not, I want to leave the center line on it because I want to run some thin CA around the edge to try to harden it up once I get the final shape. Always have to do the tips kind of by eye. And now the square part of the edge, well, the square part of the edge we're just going to radius off. Often happen in the life of Windy. Plans change. Wes is going to need the next 2 days to do some stuff that he wasn't aware of until this morning, so he's not going to be here for 2 days. So what I thought I'd do is I'd finish up the flaps, maybe even do some on the fillets. I want to wait till he's here to run the engines if possible, since this is kind of a joint project. I finished all the tapering in the flaps, so what I'm going to do, and because it's such a nice day out there, I can stick this stuff outside to dry. I'm going to I'll get it all on today, in fact. Get 5 coats of dope on these flaps. It's only going to need 20 minutes, half an hour to dry outside, and maybe even get them tissued up today or tomorrow. And then I could start making up actually I could make the fillets up before they're tissued. And the fillets on this plane, because I've already done the B25, I know they're going to take a lot longer than they originally, especially if the phone rings all day long. Anyway, let me get the rest of this dope on, take care of the phone, and we'll be able to tissue this later today. I want to start off this morning. This stuff's been drying, should be plenty dry. Just fuzz it, we're ready to tissue it. Break all the edges. Now, if I get this done early, remember that old thing I always talk about is get something drying. I get this drying early in the morning, I'll sand off all the other parts. These are ready to tissue. When we get the dope, get the tissue all cut, and most of all, have a good cup of coffee. Now, as always, I like to get tissue cut ahead of time. It's always medium weight tissue that seems to work the best. Get all the material prepared. Use Windex to wet the tissue. Be sure that when you do one side of a flap, you immediately do the other side. Don't let it just sit there. These are all little do's and don'ts that make doing this kind of nice. Now the reason for wanting to start a day off with this is we want something to be drying. We've hit a nice little spot in the weather where it seems like we may even get to have those motors run. And again, Les had some previous commitments that I thought he would be here, but obviously reality enters into the show sometimes too. And we all have those things happen. Anyway, I want to have everything cut to size. I always prefer Windex to water if at all possible. And even on these shorter flaps, even on the short ones, I don't want to have... No, let's do the big one first. Let's get the old Windex going. I wonder if we could spray it with coffee if it would help. The trick is to get it damp, not wet, not bubbly wet, just damp. That's where the towel comes in handy. Just lets it absorb only a small amount, an amount that's reasonable. Now, some of the tricks that make this, tips, tricks, whatever you want to call it. We have 5 coats of clear on here already. It's been sanded 2 or 3 times, just dust fuzz sanded. Trick is to get it wet. This is the coat that really matters when you want the tissue to stick. Get a brand new blade to do the trimming. And you want to do one side and then immediately flip it over and do the other side. No one wrote a word not long ago. There might have been more women. No one can now they're lying home. Oh, black man, they're always smiling. They talk about the heroes of their day. That's the thing that really comes while they're playing in such a special way. Put them in the hall, wax no one gave a damn not long ago. Jackie cried, but no one... And the reason I'm rushing this is I want to flip this right over. Anytime you have a problem with time, like right now if the phone rings, it's a problem. Somebody's getting a call back is what's going to happen. You want to get this on. You want to make sure it's down. This is the coat that really matters. Old black man, their voices cracking. They talk about the good old times back then. But the picture that they paint has something like me. No one really knows what might have been. Just slip the hinge pockets. Such a different tune not long ago. I wish I had some way to change it. Running all alone. Okay, that one side is down. Now we're going to try to immediately flip it, get the other side wet at the same time. You notice what happens when one side is wet. See the bend in it? Now if you let it dry that way, it can be a problem. Or if, like in my case, if the phone rings right now and I get interrupted or whatever, who knows. This is the flat silk spanning that I've had work well for, well, these planes don't seem to have a lot of warps and twists in them, so you can't be cheap with the dope on this step. Now we got that side good and wet. Again, that's another good thing about the Windex instead of water. Windex doesn't penetrate the wood like water does, which would tend to. You don't want to soak in wet. You don't want that soaked. And once you get comfortable doing this type of stuff, you can just unlimited amount of tissue in. Now it didn't drop down the way I wanted it to. You can just pick it up. Now, as always, what's the trick? Get the dope on it. And my personal thing of wanting to always push it down through with my bare hands or with gloves if you like to wear gloves. Gloves are good too. Keep both sides wet. Anytime you wet one side, wet the other side. Let them both dry at the same time. It seems like medium silk span needs about 5 coats of clear, roughly, give or take 1 or 2, before it's ready for the silver filler, or if you're using talc filler or primer. So that means hopefully within a day or 2, we'll be putting a finish on these, but in the meantime I can work on those fillets. Well, I have the table available. Now again, all of these little areas like this, we just press that down. Wrinkle. Now, even though we have this side done, we have the edge nice, hopefully, but we still have to get that schmutz out of there. So it's always a good insurance thing. You guessed it. Wet both sides. So now it's hopefully going to dry equally and without a twist. And if you keep both sides wet, even when you spray to clear, you want to have both sides wet at the same time. That's why I work over a towel. Towel is a big help on that. And that's why it doesn't matter how much clear is underneath it, even if you have an extra coat or two, because as soon as this dope goes down, it softens it right up. Those hinge pockets down. And that should really give us a good shot at having. Once this dries, we'll see if it dries nice and straight. But keeping both sides wet at the same time is the trick to everything. Now today, in today's mail, I got my catalog from Kingsport Woodworking Shop. I wanted to show a couple of things here. These are really critical because what happened, we had one of these stores called Woodworkers Warehouse, Woodworkers Paradise right in our area. In fact, we had 2 of them, and they both aren't there anymore. They've either gone out of business or moved. And so what I did, I set up to put my name on a list to get one of these catalogs, and this is all you have to do to get a catalog. You call this number, or to place an order, 1-800-228, the rest are all zeros. You want to have one of these catalogs. There are a couple of things in here that are really, really good. Let me get the phone and we'll show some of these things that are worth having. Okay, we're back. This is the thing that a lot of people have been trying to find, including myself, because we used to buy these at Woodworker Paradise. They're called tadpoles. I call them polywogs. They're made for contour sanding. You can see down at the bottom what they're actually used for. And they're pretty inexpensive. They're $3 or $4 a set, and there's a giant set that includes everything for $17. These are something, and until you have a set of these, and this is, you can see my set is really well worn. I mean, these are well-used tools. Like you always hear Wendy talk about, I like to see a tool that's all worn out and edges are all radiused off. Then I know I built some models. There's just 1,000 things you can do with these tools. Putting little fillets, little edges, little radiuses. So what I'm suggesting is, if you're inclined to, get yourself a catalog. This is a good way to get them right up front. Get the whole set for $17 and you'll be done with it. But there's a lot of stuff in this catalog that's worth looking at if these are things that you can add to your shop. The things I've always wanted to have, but it's really just a little more than I feel like spending. It's called a Fordham. It's what you see when you go to a jeweler's. It's like a real heavy-duty shaft drive Dremel tool. Now, the neat thing about this, it's got a foot pedal control, which is really handy. And they make thousands of accessories, just like for Dremel tools and everything also. But the cool thing is having the foot control. Now, when we had the big machine shop, we had one at the machine shop, and I just fell in love with it. But it's just one of the things, when my Dremel thing wears out, and I usually get a couple of years out of it, I'm definitely going to get one of these. This is another thing you can get. These are the things that you just don't see in the typical Home Depot and the stores where you normally would shop. Worth having a catalog. And it's free. That's even better. Another thing I've bought for my belt sander, and you can see from watching the videos, I use my belt sander all the time. I found that if you buy real inexpensive belts, they usually don't last. And you've got to spend the money. If you have a big belt sander, you've got to buy like industrial grade belts, or you're putting a new belt on every 2 weeks. And these belts, any belts I've gotten from these people have been really top quality. They've really been like industrial quality things. The dust collector system that I have in the shop, this is the dust collector system right here. Actually, the price hasn't gone up from when I bought it. Jim Damarel was the one who actually bought it. But these are just the accessories for the dust collector system. There's so many things in here just worth having. They got a whole list of the high-end gravity feed guns and HVLP guns, but this is something, in fact, they have the whole system for sale here if you have the money to spend. We're still happy using the system we have, very inexpensive, and the guns we use seem to be working well, and they seem to be doing the job for us. But if you're inclined to buy nicer equipment or better quality, Rich Jacobone just bought a new HVLP, and he loves it. Joe Adamusco's got one too. I have a couple of these for the drill press to take old paint off of furniture and things. These work really, really well. Yeah, and there's just so many tools in here. You could do this forever. You could be... This is something I don't have, but I really would like to get one. In fact, I may get one of these the next time I order. If you're prone to, like I am, stand in one location, I stand at my bench 99% of the time. I don't even have a chair around here that's worth sitting on. So if you stand on your feet a lot, especially if you don't wear good shoes, these are called anti-fatigue mats. This will really make your day a lot better, really give you a little bit of an advantage, I guess is the right word, over somebody that's just standing on hard concrete, or in my case I have a rug, but something that's worth having. I've had it in the past, and I think I may get one of these. Anyway, just some thoughts. This is an excellent, and there's all kinds of, and it just never ends. There's 1,000 different products in here, and they have stores, of course, but you get their catalog. I think this is one of the catalogs everybody should have in their shop. along with the Brodak catalog and Wendy's catalog and whatever, Rich Oliver's catalog. Just worth having. Now let's get back down to shop. I got things to sand. Talking about sandpaper, I got things to sand today. Remember that flap that we doped yesterday? And it was bent like a pretzel? Look at it right now. See, that's what really pays in every way, to do that doping and tissuing. That is such a critical thing if you can get a look at this. These are probably a world-class set of flaps. Hey, what do you want? You gonna help me sand today? Get. Anyway, just while we were talking about one of the polywogs, it's good for, and I've got 320 paper. I've sanded this twice. In between coats, we got a total of 5 coats of dope, but you can see how this is gonna just powder right off. This will be ready for, the next thing will be some silver filler once I'm done with this sand out. But there's another thing I wanted to do today. I wanted to make the fillets. I just thought today would be a great day to make the fillets, since it looks like it might rain out there. And then I can start getting the coats of dope on the fillets and start finalizing. That'll finish up the wing and get all the final little edges and corners and things on the wing done. Just let me show this one little thing before we do the fillet. You can see how it powders off. And that's ready for some filler. So we're going to sand all these parts out. Do this off camera. We got 4 flaps using our little polywog. And then once I get these all sanded out, I'm going to wait and I'm going to I'll put the whole model back together and then work on the fillets. But again, these polywogs are just so handy. You never know how handy these tools are until you pick them up. And for $17, you can have a lifetime supply. After I get all of this, look at this bird, get out of here. After I get this all sanded with the block, and the last thing, I always want to soft sand it. The soft part of my hand, I get out the last little bit. The catalog is pretty good. I think Les has even bought some of this sticky back sandpaper from them, but I'm not sure. I'll have to ask him. Now what's nice about working on a towel, you see how the towel absorbs all this sanding dust from the clear? Now when I'm done with this towel, just throw it right in the washing machine. What I decided to do is, because it's a rainy day, I'm going to work on those fillets. Again, usually you can, at the end of the sanding with the block and by hand, you can just feel by hand that you've got this bird. Get out of here. The bird is all dusty. Look at him. He's so dusty. Look at this. He's all dusty. Get out of here. You're all full of dust. You're never going to find a girlfriend if you're all dusty. Look at crazy bird. Look at this. He's going to bite me. Hey! Hey! Get dusty. Get out of here. Anyway, always break all the edges. Oh, gonna kill him. And once we're done sanding this, we'll just take this towel, throw it right in the washing machine. We don't have to have all that dust floating around the shop. The towel acts like a dust magnet. Anyway, next thing is going to be to kill this bird. Is to put the whole plane together, lay out the flaps, and then lay out how we're going to do the fillets against the nacelles. Kind of disappointed because I wanted to spray some silver today, but I guess it's going to have to wait. You spray silver in this weather and it just fogs right up. Even with the retarder, it's not good to do it. a trick that I learned. All of these joints, I'm trying to keep them nice and tight, of course. Take a piece of 320 paper, and every time I assemble a model, I want to just go through, because what happens, you get the paint building up, and then you get a gap that's touching, and it's squeezing on the wing, and it not only doesn't look real nice, the joint gets uneven, but what happens, you get pressure points. Now see, I've got it, it's tight right here. It built up a little bit of paint. Okay, now I want to make sure I have that same clearance. It's about the clearance of a piece of 320 sandpaper. It's loose there. I mean, we were talking about thousandths of an inch here, but to keep it nice and neat, and this is really a good trick if you're making a take-apart model, you want to be able to run between the joints, say from this point on, you want to be able to run that 320 paper right up through the joint. Otherwise, what will happen as the paint builds up, it gets to be a problem. Or you just don't get the real nice joints. And I found that if you just run it up there once or twice, it just keeps the joint nice and even. And you can see how much material actually comes off every time you do that. But that gives you a really nice joint, ultimately. Put this together. I check each joint, every place that there can be a clearance, a problem. Let me just, because we're going to get paint building up in here. So I want to be able to make sure that I don't have a clearance problem, a clearance issue in there. And I'm working toward all the clearances that have to be will be the thickness of a piece of 320 sandpaper, so that it looks symmetrical from the ring joint, these joints, all the joints, they'll look symmetrical. All the flaps and everything set in place, the last little thing, because this has been shaped now, is just to get that good connection between the tip I don't like to do this till I'm actually ready to put some silver on the flaps. Now once I'm done with that, the whole reason for having this grain here is I wanted to get a nice curve in here. I didn't want to have end grain where it's just almost impossible to get a real nice curve. I want this to be, when you rub your hand on this, or the airstream, that it flows nicely. Now, the next thing, take some thin CA on a Q-tip, whoa, get all over the place here, and just put a bead around the edge. Just want to harden that up, because that's where it's going to take a beating. Whoops. That's where it's going to take a beating. And as soon as that kicks, it's going to take a minute to kick off. Just get back and straighten it out a little bit. And that, between the grain on the end of the flap and that the CA acting like a little hard edge, should give us a nice flow. You rub your hand on that, it really feels nice. So now the next step on this is I have to find neutral so that all my flaps and all my extensions wind up in neutral at the same time. So I'm going to have to backtrack a little and from the stab measure forward, probably use a piece of the blue tape with a ruler or something. I need to establish where neutral is on these flaps. Now, one thing I have seen people that do appearance judging, the first thing they do is, and if that doesn't match real nice, well, just for looks and just for airflow going around there nice and smooth, it's worth it to put a little time on that. What I'm trying to do is using the stab and elevator line to reestablish where 0 is. Now I also want to I have a little template, and in fact I'm going to get it out right now. I want to have a half rib and a neutral so I can verify. I want 2 ways of verifying that I'm right at the right spot here. I made a dedicated jig that Mike and I can both use to line up neutral. And what it really is just a piece of wood with the ring cut out and a center line. So it follows the root of the ring and the center line, and a little spot in it I can mark this. And what I'll probably do, I'm trying to figure out a really bulletproof way of doing this. I'm going to mark one side of this, then take the jig off, put it on the other side, and rather than using the blue tape, which looks like, well, it's just a sloppy, I wanted something a little more accurate than that. I want to, for sure, mark exactly where neutral is on one flap, then go to the other side and mark neutral. And then from that point on, assuming everything is neutral, I'll line this point with this point when the flaps are up. So my reference point for one will go out, and for the other one will go out the other way. And then once I have that jig, I can use that when we do Mike's playing too, so it'll be worth the time to put into this kind of an alignment deal. Now you can see where I've been able to mark that as my neutral spot, and of course now I just go to the other side and make sure first off that there we go, we just lost it, but now we can go back and find neutral. We just put the center line on there. Now we can line up the other side the same way, and then of course just go right back, lining up the center lines, truing them up right out both ways. So this gauge, actually, this is going to be a useful thing every step of the way. And no matter what plane you have, it's always good to have a way of finding neutral. Somewhere around the, in your collection of things, it would be a good idea to make the gauge up. Thing I did to make it a little bit easier as I'm doing this, to just put a little piece of that thin orange tape right in place on both sides, so I can line up both sides at the same time, right with that center line, and then double check it with the gauge to make sure the orange tape hasn't moved when we're all done with the alignment. Check and double check. So I think that gauge is going to serve us well. That's one of the things, a lot of times when you're making up a gauge like this, you think, oh gee, it goes 10 minutes down the drain. It isn't. It's insurance that we're going to have this lined up at least right for the first flight, and hopefully we won't need a minimum of trim to it after that. The 2 center ones on dead neutral. Now the next thing is to just sight right down one flap into the other, and if it needs a tweak, we can bend the wire before we go any further. This one looks okay. And what I always do, I make a little note of which way I had to tweak it so I can check it, and I'll leave that with the alignment gauge. Because don't forget, the wire, once you bend wire, it always has a little bit of a memory. You never really know until you set it a few times and double check it if it's going to stay that way. In other words, when you're doing a flap tweak, a lot of times you tweak a flap and everything's right on the money, and a week later, it kind of sags. You got to tweak it 3 or 4 times because the wire has a memory. And that's why having this gauge is so important and going to be so handy. Now, I can reference off the side, and now when I go, I'm going to do the outside flap first. Now, once that's in neutral, I know this is in neutral, I can make these 2 little fillets and the 2 little fillets for the other side. Now, thanks to about a couple hours of tweaking here, we finally got everything goes up, everything drops into neutral at the same time, everything stops, there's no binding, even got rid of that one clicky hinge that we had. It's quite a sight when you see this with all the flaps up at one time. That's really I hope that's going to make some lift. It works on a B-25, but you never know. That's interesting. Now that that's all together, now we can start finally laying out the fillets. But that all had to be in neutral before you could lay out fillets, or else you'd have some mess on your hands later on. Now this looks like it should be a very simple job like it is on a single engine plane, but it's, believe me when I tell you, if you've never done this yet, it isn't. Now what I have to do is figure some way, and I haven't figured this out yet, I have to hold the flaps in neutral here, or I'm going to make up a pattern. There we go. And now I need to know with any piece of paper, just get a rough pattern, what this curve is going to be. I guess I could take it off of the, let's see, we could take it off of the cone cut that we have. The first thing is to just get this cut in here so that I can make what's going to be a pattern for the back piece here. Thinking one of the things that possibly you could pick up off the video is whatever skill level of pattern making I have, which is probably pretty low, but it's serviceable to me. It lets me build these models that I want to build. So now I have that curve. Now I have to, and notice I've taken all the hardware off the pen. I have to make sure this is in neutral because this has a curve this way. So the top side is going to be bigger than the bottom side. So when I lay this out, I'm going to have to lay this out with the top side quite a bit bigger. Let me just get this in here. Now, in theory, that's where we would start, and I'm going to go get a piece of scrap, 1/4 inch, just cut it up this size, and then the first thing is going to be, it's going to have to be oversized. First thing is going to be to fit it up against the nacelle, because this side of it is going to have a curve. So the top side will be bigger, bottom side will be smaller. And we got to make 4 of these, so I doubt if one pattern is going to fit both sides. We're going to be having to make a pattern for each piece. So I'm going to start by making the whole piece totally oversized. That's the only way I'm going to be able to fit that curve in there, and I'm going to have to kind of do that freehand. And there's no point even cutting the back off because we may have to slide this in and out as we radius this piece out to fit up against the nacelle. The first time I did this for the B-25, I thought, oh, boy, is this going to be a pain? And it was. Of course, we're way oversized. So the first thing we can do is, we're going to have to cut this piece off to allow for the horn. Now it's going to be a question of starting to take some of this material off of here. And we want to keep this edge neat because I don't want to have a radius in there. I want to have a sharp 90-degree cut. Now, maybe one of the things I can do here, this is always a handy little trick to do when you're doing these kind of radiuses. Notice I left this oversized because I know when I get to the end this is going to go up, 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 and I'm going to have no more material here. Then once these fillets are in place, I need to extend this little area. I've been working this area. Still not exactly right. We need a little more of a curve on it. Let's see if we can get that up just a little bit. We need the middle. You got to constantly be looking for the side, the hard part, the part where it's rubbing, so you get a nice fit. Now, if you look real close, you can see we're having a hard fit right there. That's where it's just not happy right there. Getting closer. This takes a lot of patience. And one of the guys that taught me the value of patience is we were renovating the older of the two rental properties. It's over 100 years old with John DeTavio, and he was fitting in pieces of sheetrock. All these old houses have angles and edges, and all the floors are crooked, and I watched him like a hawk. And he was working for me at the time, and he said, "I know what you're doing. You're thinking, how can I use that in modeling?" And you know what? He was right. I see we still have a hard edge here, so maybe what I have to do, I have to kind of mark where this is hard. See the amount of material that has to come out of there? Again, I'm going to take a lot of time and fit these in as tight as I can because I don't want to have a fillet that doesn't look right, but it looks like it doesn't belong there. Well, just a little bit more, but it seems like we're never going to get this right. Okay, now I have it close. Now if you look at it, the only problem is we have too tight of a fit here, and what I want to do is push it up slightly. So when I go to push it up, I want to figure out how much I have to take off. I'm probably going to have to take off like a 1/64 of an inch off this side, which I'll go do with the belt sander. I'll just take the line off. And it's really sheetrock fitting at its best. Sheetrock fits. Once that's off, I want it to butt up against the wing. Getting close. Next thing is to notch this out for the horn wire. And that's right on center, so that ought to be easy just to get a half moon in there. Just run a Dremel tool bit in there. Now, the only problem is now we're in neutral. We're tight on the edge of the flap by, let's see, we're tighter in the back than we are at the front. Let me get the phone. I gotta do the original piece, which I guess I'll use as a pattern. The problem with it is where it butts up on the wing, it's a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch. So what I did, I made one out of 3/8, and it just touches. It doesn't have any room for error. And I thought, well, I'll just save this for a pattern anyway. And what I did, I roughed one at a 1/2 inch. And now what I have to do, once I get the shape right, and I need to get the shape first, I need to put the taper in it because the ring is thicker than the flap is. So what I'm going to try to do is carve that in. Keep in mind I have to carve it in as I set this. In other words, by the time I get this angle in here, this radius, this part moves closer and closer to the flap. I got it backwards. As I'm cutting this away, it moves closer to the nacelle. So I made it plenty oversized, and I got to just start all over again, and there's no sense videoing it, is just get this curve right, get the little nub in the front, trim off the side that hits the flap, and then the last thing when it's in place, and I have the taper in it, because it's going to go from almost 1/2 inch down to 1/8, so it's going to have quite a taper in it when I'm done. I just remember this being such a job on that B25, and it looks like it's going to be just as much of a pain, but it's one of the challenges, and when people look at it, they don't even appreciate how much work goes into something, one little part of this plane. I have enough of these, making about 5 of them so far. Get one that looks like it's going to be okay, and what I'll do, of course, is tack it into position. I need to make sure you get a piece of this good old-fashioned 320 sandpaper, because I don't want to have any interference there. That should be enough. Now to make it easier to install, what I'm going to do is just hollow this out just a little bit so it's not hitting. See what happens when you have a curve coming up to a flat, the middle needs to be taken out. But we'll get a little bit of weight out of it too, of course. It's hard to believe such a little piece can be such a nuisance, but It's little details like this that just make the plane, I guess, special to me. If I can get some of this material out, what'll happen, it'll just make it easier to get that fit up against the fuselage or get it a little tighter. Okay, that should make for just getting it up on there a little bit nicer. Quite, almost a whole afternoon to make one part. And we have 4 of them we have to make, so it's just tacked in place. But I have my block that has the cutback. I put just enough thick CA in there to try to get it to attach and fill a gap. It's gap filling. Because it's going to be very time consuming getting this fillet to match this fillet, I'm sure of that. That's step 2 of this. This little part of it is going to take a lot of hours. And once we're done and we have that leveled out, still got some high spots in there. In fact, you know what I can do? I can use that little polywog guy. I'm going to get down into the corner. And it looks like the only one I'm going to get done tonight is one of these, and that's basically ate up most of the afternoon, but when it's done forever. Now, once that's relatively clean, it's not really super clean yet. You can get it from this angle too. I'm trying to maintain the same radius that the fillet has. And I'm hoping I'll get done early enough that I can get some silver on the flaps, let it dry overnight. But only be able to do that if it stops raining. Okay, now that it's got that, now you can basically just run a thin bead down there, small amount. I'm turning this as I go, trying to get it to sit down in there. Okay. We're going to let that kick now. The next step is to basically see if we still have clearance for a 320 sandpaper, which we probably don't. But it's good that it's tight, because every time we paint it, we'll be going back and forth here to get our clearance. All the hatches, all around these ink lines, that's the whole key. You got to do it every couple of coats of paint. Okay, and then the last thing is, I'll have to flip it over and redundantly do everything on the bottom. Now, there's a good chance tomorrow the other ones will go a little quicker, but I'm not really in any rush. They get done, they get done. I just want them to be as nice as possible. This is for sure one of the areas, having this nice fillet go the whole way. What's known in the world of real aviation as the Coke bottle fillet, where it gets bigger and smaller, and a nacelle goes over a wing. The B-25 and A-26 both have what they deem as Coke bottle fillets. And we want to keep a nice sharp edge in there. probably all we're going to be able to get done tonight. I'm going to see if it stops raining. Later tonight, if it stops, I'll come back and put the silver on the flaps, but if it doesn't, I'll just leave it and wait for a day where we have a little bit of sunshine. Caught a little bit of a break. You can see it's dark out. I'll be able to get the coat of silver on. Rain has stopped, which is amazing. Usually you get the reverse of a break. See a coat of silver filler, which will sand off tomorrow. It'll dry overnight. And you can see I'm just pouring it on. Just we're going to sand it off anyway, so there's no point trying to put it on lightweight. Put it on. Yeah, today I wanted to mention one of the things that we have really made good use of. We were talking about tools the other day from the Woodworker Warehouse and the Woodworker Paradise kind of places, but Les went out and invested in quite a few of these shapers, and I thought to myself, well, you know, that's a lot of money for a sanding block, but when I look at how many, I mean, we've built this model with this, and Les's several wings already and different parts. Another thing I wanted to mention, one of these tools, and I got this was some kind of an award, I don't know, when Scott Smith was still in business, some kind of a little thing. And what they did, they gave me a set of perma-grit tools. Now these were the perma-grit tools, and again, you know, my penchant for, I don't like to see pretty tools all chromed and sitting in a shelf that are never used. I thought at the time, I said, wow, these things were, you know, a couple of bucks a piece. Well, that's a nice little gift. Well, what's happened is I've never been able to wear them out. I mean, they get clogged up with stuff, and what you do is when they get clogged up with glue or epoxy, you soak it in a little tub of acetone overnight, and they're back to being brand new. They, for all purposes, never wear out. Now, some of the cheaper ones, we bought those on sale, those $17 ones, well, they wear out. You know, some of these, let me just give you an example. Some of these that came from, gee, I'm not even looking at the right one here. Well, here's a good example. These are the ones that come with a little sanding drum and a little screw. What happens is they wear out. But the perma-grit ones never wear out. So even though you're paying, I don't know, $5 or something for these in the long run become a much better value. And this sanding thing, I don't think we could build a model without it now. So anyway, they come from Bob Violet Models, but I'm sure it's only a matter of time before pretty much all the hobby stores, and I'm hoping Brodak will carry these soon. But anyway, they just put the little Bob Violet model. This is where Les bought his from. Telephone number is 407-327-6333. Now, the reason I always like to turn people on to good quality tools, because once you have a tool like this, it breaks your heart to spend the money. Once you have a tool, you never can figure out how you built planes without it. This tool lets you get right in corners and edges and angles, and it's got a soft side, a hard side. I've been using it. I used it on the flaps, the last thing I can remember. Carving and sanding, it's good with carbon fiber, it's good with wood, and the nice thing, it never wears out. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. If you're going to get tools, especially if it's your birthday or Christmas or something, consider these. These are good quality items. All right, let's get back to the shop. Now, last night, just before dark, we managed to get some silver on this, and the parts are all hanging up by the heating vents here. But one of the things that I wanted to see how it was going to come out, I took and just put a quick coat of thick CA on there, because I wanted to do a little, just a feel for how that was going to look when it was in silver, and if that fillet was going to look okay. I think that's going to be just about as good as we can expect. So the bad news is I got to do 3 more of them, and believe me, this takes a lot more time than you think it does. Again, I'll probably do the rest of these off camera, because these really get labor intensive. But just see, this has one coat of thick CA and a coat of silver while I was spraying it. I got to get all my flaps back on the plane. Yeah, that's going to look fine, I think. Anyway, we're expecting Mike Costello over here later today, possibly to give us a little report on VSC. He was just at VSC, and of course he's always enthusiastic about flying his ballerina, his old-time stunt planes and stuff. So, but in the meantime, I'm going to start working on those little fillets. We got 3 more to make, and they're basically the same as the one we made yesterday. Well, what happened here is we have a really nice day for doing some painting. So what I thought I'd do, rather than make the other fillet, I want to do some touch-up. I got some spots back here I want to run. A couple of spots on the wing, couple of spots on the fillets, and I want to just get the base on one side of this done, because this afternoon it should be real nice and the stuff will dry right up outside. And we're expecting Les and Mike here to do some work. This way this stuff can all be up nice and drying while they're working on other projects.
It's at least I can breathe.
All right, Les has been really sick. I don't know. All right, you got the blocks going?
Here. Yeah.
All right. It's a good day to do flaps. I'm sanding out another coat of silver on the flaps while he works over there. And believe it or not, we have a sunny, bright day out there. The paint's drying up in a matter of minutes. It's unbelievable what a good day it turned out to be. Want to go outside for a little while? Want to go outside? Check out the chicks outside? You want to check the chicks out? Maybe some females out there, Chickie. Hey, no biting. Hey, who are you biting? Hey, there's no biting. Friends don't bite each other, Chickie. Friends kiss each other. Well, because it's such a really nice day. In fact, it's really t-shirt weather. I really could. If I knew it was going to stay like this, I'd take the cover off the pond. We finally have the mag jets. I want to get some time on running them. I want to break them in, of course. Get them into the test plane, possibly this weekend. It's supposed to be in the 50s and 60s, so once we get the motors running on a bench, I'll run them for probably half an hour or so on a bench, and then try to get a day of flying on each one of them before having them ready or supposedly ready for the bomber project. And of course, I have my assistant out here for the first time this year. He's been out here. He's excited about the possibility of finding a girlfriend. In fact, I think he spotted one. Let's see, where is that? Where is that bird, Chickie? Well, I don't know. We can't find that bird. Oh, there he is. Chickie, it's your girlfriend. Now, thanks to having clamp mounts, and you can see how nicely this is bolted right into the front of our old test model. We want to especially thank John Gajewski, who donated this as our test plane, one of our test planes. Les has been using it, I've been using it to check things, test things, and just in general, when it's a rough day and you don't want to risk your good #1 plane, well, this is a good choice. And we're going to use it to test out Scott Dinger's mufflers, #1, and to #2, one of the things we want to do is we want to get some time on each one of these motors. I've broken the other one in. They're both sitting in plastic bags, and what we'll try to do if we get to the flying field over the weekend, we have to put some doors in my two-family house. What we're going to do after putting the doors in is run up the field, and even if we can't fly stunt patterns, we can just fly level. I think it's always better to fly. The engine just loads better and everything than running it on a bench endlessly. Anyway, we'll get that ready for the bomber project. Well, we had a little change of plan today. We were going to work on my rental property, and what happened was the doors that came in 3 inches too big. So what it means is we're going to try to go even between the raindrops here. Take our test plane out, get some time on the motor, try to get friendly with the motor, and most of all, get some time on both of them. Wes is going to hopefully be able to join us, bring the test stand, and see how these little motors perform in the real world. A little progress report on our new field. They've got the fence up, which should be a big help. They didn't do the whole thing all the way to the netless soccer court, so that's going to be a problem when they're playing soccer, but we got a pretty good work crew here the goal of the day is try to get some of this swept up. They got the places for the stooges in already. And once we do, what we're going to try to do is do a little bit of the field every day. Once we get a little bit done, we'll take out we got a test bench all set up to run motors, and of course we got a test plane to fly. And I think Brian brought a plane down too. Not sure, but even if we get, you see how much of this they got.
Okay, I did my part.
The crew did their part here. And I guess if we get even one little quadrant done every day, this is going to shape up to be a nice field. The thing that's nice here, if you do a little walk around, is the air is directional. Even though it's a cold day, not a cold day, but it's not a summer day. Even when the leaves are on the trees, this is going to be relative directional air. You guys look like a prison work gang. You ought to get you some of those prisoner uniforms. As Les gets his first tune-up flight here, and we're just basically running the motors in. Get some time on the motors. Thought we're going to be doing any real flying today unless Brian takes his plane out. It'll be good to get these motors at least an hour on each motor. Now, after testing about, I think we've had 10 different props on the plane already. Trying to find the ideal prop. It seems like one of the ones that works pretty nice, loads the motor right, is the APC 10.5, 4.5, and the 11.4. That wood power prop 11.4 seems to really work nice on this motor. I haven't put any of the 3 blades or any of the carbon props on because the motor is still relatively new, but in retrimming out the plane, we noticed because this has the lighter motor on it now, we need some nose weight, so we'll probably go, next time we fly it, put a spinner on it or a bigger tank. We had, the original thing was, we had it with Scott Dinger's 2 mufflers. We tried each one, didn't seem to be bad in any way. We put big arts on just to add some nose weight. His is an ounce heavier, almost an ounce heavier. That seems to help with the nose weight. The run didn't change at all. So if you need nose weight, obviously a big arc thing is probably the choice. If you're looking to keep the thing light, Scott Dinger's is probably the choice. And we're going to stay here, I hope, for the rest of the day until it rains or gets dark, and just fly this and just get familiar with the engine. Now, while we're doing this, of course, we We got the other engine over here on the bench. We're going to get this one running. And Les has one that's never been run. We have 3 engines to run today. As is always the case, keeping us constant companion, our friends the geese. We're going to have to get some evil skeevers. Poison these geese with evil skeevers or something. But the field is really nice. The air is directional. We got the bench all squared away, and we're getting flight after flight, breaking these mag jets in. It looks like it's going to be a really nice, friendly motor. Very easy to needle. So far, I've been holding a nice wide range of props. But I have my new toolbox after driving over my old toolbox. The new toolbox is working nice, the little new fuel bottle. And what we do is keep all of...
Which is good?
Either one. It doesn't matter. We got all the APCs that we've been using, and then underneath that, all the woods that we've already gone through the woods and we're into the APCs. So one of the ones that worked real well, 11.4 power prop, really was a nice load. For this particular engine on this particular day, it was a good choice, and I'm really happy the way the... let's hope I don't just run this over again. Well, yesterday we had a great day running those motors. We're going to get another day of running on them before we consider them totally broken in. Switch them into planes so that we have air time and bench time on both of them. And this is going to be, let's hope, another nice day. You never know. Weather this time of year is unpredictable, but downtown Rutherford is just starting to get green. The grass is starting to get green, and I even have flowers coming up in my backyard. Amazing. But we spent half of the morning helping this guy get his kite out of a tree. He's having fun with this kite. But it doesn't look like it's going to be a great flying day, but we are going to get to run the other motor. We took the first one out, and Brian's putting in a uniflow vent here so we can see how this is going to run, if it's going to be an improvement on uniflow. Just mix up the 5-minute. So we never had a uniflow vent the other day, so we're going to connect these two.
It's 5 minutes, it's 5 years.
Yeah, well, Sabatino, you know that. And leave it in the sun will help kick it anyway.
We only got...
On-the-spot repairs.
We only got 4 minutes on this one.
They'll mix a lot of it and leave it in one lump, and then that'll help kick it off. They're getting the stooges in for the right-hand level flying and the left-hand flying. You're not putting them in crooked, are you, Rich? The last ones you put in were all cockeyed. You had them into where the plane was. The plane is like facing the fence, for crying out loud. Who laid that out?
Huh?
Well, you had them in crooked the last time. Let Brian put them in. Let Brian put them in.
We got ours in. He put them in so straight either. This is fencing right there.
Hey, I put them in where I was directed to put them.
By who?
Yes.
Just waiting for a uniflow vent to dry.
Oh!
So Wes's test stand did its job. It worked well, and we have our first motor done, ready for the bomber. We get some runs on the second one. Well, maybe even another day. We're just going to get familiar with the motors if these guys ever get done putting these stooge bolts in. Testing some of our APC prop collection to get some idea for some information we might be able to pass on to Richard. We're going to start with the prop we had yesterday and then just go right down the stick.
10.5, 4.5.
Okay, the first one's 10.5, 4.5? Yeah, that one, and that's good for when the engine's new. Doesn't load the engine up much, but Richard said the 11s were working good too. We're finally going to bite the bullet and get a pressure fitting on this and shim the tank properly, and hopefully at that point get a little more fine tuning on what we're doing. Well, we found out one thing. The motor definitely likes running on muffler pressure a lot better than uniflow. That's been the biggest eye-opener, and we have at least 3 or 4 of the APC props that seem to be working pretty nice. So And we're wearing our test pilots out for the second day in a row here. We've had every one of those props on the plane. There's good, bad, and mediocre. So far, it's still a question of the 11.4 and the 10.5, 4.5. Those are the two that seem to work the best. Who said they weren't going to fly the sweeper here today? Look at this guy. They're putting Zambelli out of business. There's only room at this field for one sweeper, Jacobone. Well, we just had not the greatest weather-wise weekend, but we really did get both engines running, got a lot of prop testing, got relatively familiar with the engines. So this morning, and what's nice is all weekend while we were out there playing and fooling around, our silver's been drying. It should sand out like a mirror today, anything that we want to sand out. This is from Kenny Clapson in Canada, and he always sends me some interesting stuff. This is his latest ship. Let me get the phone. His latest ship and motor combination. All right, this is Kenny Clapson's Brodak Olympic. This is Kenny Clapson's pain in the neck bird. Bird, get out of here! Yeah, anyway, he misses me when I'm away all weekend. Then Monday morning he's in love with me again. Anyway, this is a really neat plane. There's some cool information on here. Now what he has, he's making a plane specifically to leave in his truck while he's out on the road. I guess he does a lot of his, he calls it the motel bird. I'm reading his letter here. The reason I'm calling it my motel bird is she was primarily constructed in my motel room this winter while up on Smoky Lake, Alberta, Canada, doing my greenhouse thing. I was staying at the Plainsman Motor Inn, so she's just a plain Jane. Now, of course, everything Kenny does is really real classy. I really enjoy looking at this stuff. What I think's really cool is how many other people put a floor in their house to match their plane. That's pretty neat. Anyway, and if Ken would be so kind as to send us some full-size 5x7s of this, I think this is a good subject for one of the covers of Stump News, but they're not going to take it off of computer printouts, that's for sure. So if you want to see yourself on the cover of Stump News, 5x7s, glossy. Ken's Olympic plastic covering. Oh, I love the fact that the floor matches here. No wheel pants. We're on the road, end up flying at any old baseball or soccer field that's in town. Fuses Brodak dope, rings Ultra Coat that I got for Christmas. Went with plastic rings because on the road it gets rough. It gets hurt. Doug, Gary, and Tim are quite abusive on my toys. Yeah, I know, people give me a rough time in my shop too, especially this bird. Anyway, this is what Kenny does for a living, and many times he sent me these type of pictures, these big giant plastic covered greenhouses. Now if he really was a cool guy, he'd make one big enough that we could fly in, but I'm not going to hold my breath. Anyway, one final picture here. How can you not like this? And I'll read the caption. Licensed German short-haired pointer, buffers, A26 certified, seeking gainful employment, will travel, housebroken, eager to please. Yeah, you Chicky, here's your friends. Chicky, come here, these dogs are hungry. The big one, Jangles, works for pizzas. Chicky, these are your friends. You want a bird for a pet? The big one, Jangles, works for pizza and tells me that Windy fella doesn't know a thing about buffing. Yeah, he's probably right. A high-quality buff job is more than some gorms and elbow grease. It's tongue action. The little one, Echo, doesn't know anything, but he sure can whittle balls up quickly. They're waiting for me to take them to the park for the run. The little one has doubled in size since we brought her home. Anyway, be careful. Chicky's looking for a new pet. Anyway, Ken, thanks for the pictures, but get me some big 5x7s here, some glossies. This looks like something could possibly be on one of the covers or back cover. And the other thing, anybody else, the people that have been sending pictures in regularly, just send them in. And I'll make sure that when people don't understand, you can't send a computer printout. it doesn't transpose well into the print world. It's okay for the videos, but if you want it to be in stunt news too, you got to have, like, the best thing is a 5x7 glossy. Anyway, just for whatever that's worth. And anyway, we will, let's get back to sanding that silver. I am in the mood after a weekend of flying. I'm stoked to get working on this A26 again. And those motors ran in so nice. And here's where, to me, the fine points of finishing, some of the things you can always consider and always put in the bank. It's a relatively nice day for painting. The paint will dry probably in less than an hour. So what I want to do, since I still have to make the outer fillet, I want to get a coat of, sand this silver off with 1200. Like I said, what I want to do is just answer the phone all day and get it outside drying. 1 second. My phone call was Dave Midgley, and what we were talking about was he managed to get 4 sheets of Roasil. Roasil is the stuff we were hoping we could make with those aluminum molds that he has, make flaps and elevators, but next time he pays a visit, and that'll probably be in a month or so, we'll definitely do some more experimental stuff. In the meantime, the idea here, and I think I was making the point, and it's a good point, is you always want to start off each day getting something drying. In this case, because what's going to happen is these are the outer flap and that little flapper on that goes in between the nacelles. What happens if I get a coat of silver on this, I'm sanding it out with 1200, I can get a coat drying on this. In an hour, it'll be dry. Well, in that hour that it's drying, I can be sanding the other parts, the rudder, the different things that need little touch-ups and stuff. And I'm constantly looking around to make little repairs. Now, I noticed one of the little fillets in the back on the elevator, I had a fingernail mark or something in it. I have the red stuff drying, the putty. I want everything drying. Once this is all drying, then I can just look around, take one part at a time, take the 1200 paper, pick away at it, find any little mistake, any flaw. This is the point in time where a lot of people are prone right now. They'd be real happy with this. They'd say, oh, geez, let's go flying, or something. And what happens now is you're at the bottom of the ninth, and you got to tough out at least one more time of sand and a silver with 1200 before you get that really, really nice, substrate. And this last coat, we won't sand all of it off because we're going to try to put on a very thin coat of silver. I'm going to decant this last coat of silver. That means let it all sink to the bottom so it'll be extra pigment. And just put on a minimum. Try to get it on with about 15 pounds of air pressure and just let it sit on there and lay out nice and flat. And that'll be our base coat for the B25 silver. And I have thought of, and maybe I'll do a little test here because we have so many extra thoughts, I had thought of sanding that last coat out and using B25 silver for the last coat. Maybe that would help eliminate one coat, I don't know. But the downside of that is, first off, the B25 silver is more money. I don't want to use it for filler either. It just seems like a waste. And I really want to have the woodwork or the substrate perfect in my eyes, or as good as I feel like I can get it, on every inch of the model before I put on what will be a coat of paint that you'll see. You believe this phone today? Doesn't look like we're going to get a lot painted. Anyway, but that's what I'm trying to get started with today, and we'll see how the day pans out. Now, today's job is going to be to just replicate that. Yesterday we got the silver on the flaps, what I hope is going to be the final coat of silver. Everything is hanging up there drying for a day. Now it's just a question of putting the flaps in place, and it's going to be a repeat of what we did on the other side, so I guess there's not much point in just recording every step of it. But what is important is to see that once this little piece of woodwork is done, we're pretty much finished with the woodwork, and then I'm going to make up my schedule for the last 6 or 7 maybe things. I have to make fuel tanks, and we've got the motors broken in, a filleting, maybe one more coat of silver sanded out, and we will be ready to start putting the paintwork on this. And that's to me, one of the most enjoyable things. Once you have all that silver sanded, that's just like a watershed, landmark, whatever you want to call it, and we'll be ready. We just have one more of these little fillets to make. I should be able to finish that today in the normal course of the day if the phone doesn't start ringing, and we will have the woodwork done. Quiet, bird. Today we got all this sanded out. We finally have both of the fillets in place. Now it's just going to be a question. I'm going to take the Brodak primer and an airbrush and work this area here, and then start what I hope will be, if not the final, one of the final, looking around for little mistakes. Seems a little ding somebody, looks like a bird might have pecked at. And some of the other little things that we want to dress off. Finish dressing this end up. Little primer on the fillets, a little finishing of the filleting area, and I think what's going to happen here, we're going to be, in the next day or so, we're going to be done with all of the cosmetic part of this finish, and then we'll have to be making a decision on how we want to do the paint job. Now, one thing is true for sure. The first one took probably 4 or 5 hours, maybe 6 hours. This one took about half of that amount of time. Every time you do something, and when you find this out on a twin, you're almost forced to find it out. The first time you do a nacelle or a fillet or any part, and whatever the amount of time is, the second time it always goes just a little bit quicker. And we got all the rest of the silver drying up over there. We're just closing in on it, and this is when it really gets exciting. It's like coming down a home stretch, and you can see the finish line here with Seabiscuit. Now before I do any of the airbrush work, there's always a couple of areas that I want to address. There's a little area in the fillet there. There's always a spot, and the best way to find these spots is with your bare hand. Even in silver, your hand is better than doing these things than your eye if you're really looking for that perfect, no-flaw finish. Just use your hand, and every time I felt one of these, I just put a little bit of my red filler in there, give it 10-15 minutes to dry. And while one side is drying, I could be working on the other side. Now it's these little areas here that I've been really going over again, and just taking my hand and running it through a fillet, I found that little spot that you really didn't see, but the little tadpole polywog, little rubber pieces, I guess is the right word. And what I do, I just keep taking, you can see what I've done, I've moved it over, because what happens, in a matter of maybe a minute, it wears out a ridge in the sandpaper. So if you just get in there, these things are so handy. And I think I put on this tape or on one of the tapes where you can buy a set of these. Once you have these, you cruise. There's so many jobs you can do. And this happens to be one of them. Now, anytime I'm working a fillet, I'm working this side right up into the hole area, and then I work down into the corner. Always work into the corner. And on this plane, these, what we'll call a Coke bottle fillets, they really have to be really perfect because they're a focal point that you see that right away, as soon as you look at the plane, you see these areas. And what I'm trying to do is get all the little areas while I have the flaps off the plane in here. I've already set the clearance with the sandpaper, so I know I've got the shape I want. And that's why it's easy now with the fuselage off of the wing. It's a lot easier to get in here too. But we're going to be ready soon for some Brodak primer and an airbrush. Now at this point in time, we're hoping that all the repairs we're going to do are going to be very small repairs. So an airbrush is a good choice. The other advantage of using an airbrush, you can control it. I can do it actually. I can do it in the shop today because it is raining out there. But one of the things that I can really do that's nice with the airbrush, I can get right in all these corners and not get a lot of overspray on the model. And what happens, you don't build up a lot of extra material that you just have to sand off. So yeah, if you have an airbrush, right now is a good time. I'd say right around that last coat or next to last coat of silver, just do all your touch-ups with Brodak primer and an airbrush, and that really seems to work well. We've really had good luck using that around fillets and around all these little corners and edges. Now, if we did this with a spray gun, of course, the overspray would be everywhere. Hopefully, another thing too, the airbrush puts on a smaller amount of material, so you can control it better. And each coat dries, and every time you put a coat on, you really have to sand it to pick away at the high spots, or else you're going to just wind up adding too much paint. Let me get the airbrush out. Let's get some material on there. That's looking like it's going to be okay. Now what I do, I mix up some Brodak primer, just a little bit more than 50-50. And in this case, what I did, I put 1 or 2 drops of black, Brodak black in there. The reason is, I want the primer to come out gray. It'll just make, for the fact that if we do go through in a spot and just happen to touch it, we're not going to see a white spot jump out. We'll see kind of a gray spot jump out. Another thing with Brodak primer, you've got to stir it constantly. When you first get the can, you've got to spend 5 minutes stirring it. It's a high, solid material, and it all sinks to the bottom eventually. Now that's about the right consistency, and we'll see once we hook this up. See, it even dries on the bottom here. This is an Iwata gun that I got from Will Namora, and obviously we use it regularly. In fact, what's nice about this particular gun, it has a double trigger action. You press down for air and then back for material. What happens with this, it's really good for doing our ink work, our shading. We're going to be using this a lot in the near future. I've also learned with this particular gun, it's a good idea to, at the end of a session, run maybe a third or a half a thing of thinners through it, and take the tip off and clean whatever's in the tip, especially with primer. The primer tends, because it's a thick material, it tends to clog the gun, the very fine areas in here up. But otherwise, let me hook up the air. Let's go see what we can do some touch-ups here. I always try to set the pressure as low as possible on a spray out. What I want to do is just control the material. See what a small amount you can get on there, just a little tiny amount, and it's coming out gray instead of white, which is going to be better for our base finish. By the way, if you were doing a red plane, you could tint it red. That's going to be about how much material we want to get on. Trying to spray with about 15 pounds of pressure. Okay. I mentioned this before, but Bernie Trent got me this, what he calls a whip end hose, and it's real good with the airbrush. It's a thinner hose than we normally use, and what happens is it comes down to a even thinner hose, which allows you better control, which in the case of an airbrush comes down to an even thinner hose. But boy, Bernie sells these products. This really works great too, and it's really helpful when you're doing airbrushing. This airbrushing you can actually do inside because you're using so little material. If it were a better day, I would do this outside. But right now it's just out of the question. But see how nice you can get filler in an area? Okay, you can put a little bit extra on there, because what we're going to do is when we're done with this, we're going to 1200 wet sand it out 3 or 4 or 5 times. That'll take about an hour to dry. Once that dries, and this is extremely good to do, like a fillet around a cockpit area, a fillet like this, which is a difficult one. This is difficult here. We've been working this fillet up here for quite a while, trying to get it perfect. We're trying to get it as good as we can. I'm not sure, but I think Brodak sells these Will Namora guns and airbrushes. I'm not really sure. I think he did it one time though. This would be my first choice if you were going to invest in an airbrush. You can really do some detail work with this, and having a good airbrush is just critical. You know, with the airbrush you can get in all these corners and edges that it's really difficult. With a spray gun, you're just putting on way too much material. And then, of course, if you're concerned with the weight, you're just adding weight too. And this is, in my opinion, this is how the best use for Brodak primer is doing these kind of little touch-up areas. It really has a high fill. It builds a surface almost instantly. 1 or 2, 3 coats, you've got a surface. The trick is just don't leave a lot on a plane. Sand most of it off. You can see that's building up as quick as you can reasonably expect. Now an hour later we'll be able to, I hope, just going to be able to sand that right out with 1200, put the next coat on, and we can go over and over until we're happy with the amount we have on there and the quality of the fillet. And this is one of the enjoyable parts of model making for me, is what I call a detailing. Now I will spend, and you probably won't realize how many hours actually go into this part of it, I will spend an awful lot of time going back over these little spots, because to me it's really important. When I put a model out on a field, I would like it to be my best work. I consider what I do to be nothing short of being an artist. It's no different than making artwork, making sculpture, making oil paintings. And I want each one to be, as, you know, a real unique expression. It's part of what I am and what I do and who I am. And the quality of the work has to speak for me. I don't like to do a lot of talking. I like to put the model out there and let that a quality finish speaks a lot louder than getting up on a podium and giving a sermon, that's for sure. When you're using relatively low pressure like this, you can get really fine control. And then we're going to go back over the wing and the fuselage and the tail and everything. We're not going to put it all on camera, of course, because it really amounts to be a lot of hours. I mean, if you were sitting around here watching me do this in real time, you'd probably be bored to death. But this is one of the things that I guess everybody finds different things they enjoy. I enjoy this detailing out because I know the final result. When you look at a model that's been detailed to this level, it just jumps right out at you that it's special and it's different than all the others. And especially on a semi-scale plane where the whole reason for building the plane is what it looks like. If it didn't look semi-scale, what would be the point of even building it? Needless to say, you always want to have a fan going if you're working inside. Anytime you open any chemicals, any dope, any material, epoxy, is good to have a fan going. Good ventilation is a good thing. Here's an area where I can see I need a lot of work. I can see the grain coming through. I've sanded through in a few spots. So what I'm going to try to do, and right up there, I'm going to try to get a little bit extra material in there. Just let that dry. Another good thing you can do if you don't have an airbrush and you just get your first airbrush, even if you get an inexpensive one first to practice with, just practice. Get used to the idea. You press down and there's air, and as you pull the trigger back, you have material coming out. It's a little bit of a technique you can try, and most people can pick it up in a very short time, even people that work here in the shop. Now while this is drying, we could take one of the other parts that we want to do some detailing on, stab, elevators, whatever, one piece at a time. It really is a nice way to work because this is only going to take about an hour to dry. Anybody I've ever showed here in the shop to use the airbrush, it takes them 5-10 minutes to get used to that double trigger action, but as soon as they do, now here is a bad spot right there. So what I'll do is just kind of fill it with primer. And if you have big mistakes, let that dry 5 minutes, put a little more on, and you can just build a little extra material in there. Let the airbrush get to be your friend. Okay, while all our parts are drying up, we have a little time. What I want to do, I want to start fitting the rudder to the fuselage. What I'm going to have to do ultimately, though, is put the ring in the body when it's dry to the touch. And I have some wet paint up on the tail, too, touch-ups that I've been doing. I need to assemble a whole model so that I can get the tail straight and relative to the ring dihedral and the tail dihedral and not have it tip it one way or another, or have it crooked on the fuselage one way or another. I also was careful while I put the whole rudder together to put a hole in each rib, and now I need to drill a hole in the bottom of this and a little hole in the fuselage so air can bleed out of the rudder while it's sitting in the sun and cooking, as these things do, and the things don't puff up, the surfaces don't puff up. And then what would happen is, it really, to me, it looks terrible. Then you have to put a hole in it after you've buffed out the model. This way it's just a lot easier to do this right now. Now I spent a really lot of time making sure I had the tail in straight. Because of the dihedral angle, it's really critical that I didn't get it in crooked. And you can see as it disappears below the wing equally. So we're real happy with the way that worked out. Now the trick is to get the rudder in so that the dimension from here to here and here to here is exactly the same. And I don't want to take even the slightest chance that that's going to be, when we're all done, be tilted one way or another, because once we get it permanently installed, it'll be really difficult to change it or to fix it or whatever. And as you can see, every time you put the model together like this, I just get tempted to want to just walk around it and see it from different angles. This is the angle I kind of like from the back. And we can do this now. All our filleting is dry to the touch. But getting that in perfectly straight, it's gonna be a little bit more time consuming than you think, but it'll be worth it. Make sure I got the hole in there. I'm going to allow this to vent. Now I need to figure out exactly where on this the appropriate hole is going to be, and then I want to look from inside the fuselage to make sure I can run a pin up through there, make sure I don't have this sealed up. I don't want this to be a sealed up thing and have this puffing up in the sun. It's such a big rudder and it's such a defining part of the model. I don't want to have it in some way look like a puffed up blowfish at the end of the day. Get this in place because we already have this curve. We have another issue we have to deal with. We have to get this right in the position it's supposed to be in, which is right there. Put a piece of tape up in the front just to mark the front where that would be. Now I need to lay it over on its side. And I know the hole I'm going to need is right here. And now I know that hole and this hole should mate up, and that should vent the rudder. And that should be our vent hole, but of course once the whole thing is installed, we'll go from the inside out with a pin, make sure that the holes are lined up well. Next thing is going to be to make sure we get a nice tight fit here and make sure we don't have any gaps in this. And there is a high spot, which I can see. We're rocking right here. So what I'm going to do is take out the center of this, just so we're resting on the two edges. What I'm trying to do here is just relieve this, because don't forget this is going onto a round fuselage. So I want to take out the middle. Then what I'm going to do is put some sandpaper, some sticky back sandpaper right on the fuselage itself, and then use the fuselage itself for a sanding block. Get that a little bit. Chicky, get out of here. Like to get a relatively nice fit here. Again, this rudder, this makes the plane. The A26 rudder is the defining feature of the plane. Almost like the twin tails are on the B-25. Now I can use something that's roughly the diameter of the fuselage back there just to get a little bit of a shape on this. This is where having those sanding shapes, I'm sure there's one that's roughly the shape of the fuselage. It'll be a big help in getting a nice tight fit, but the final thing will be just to have some sandpaper on top of the fuselage. That'll get us our final fit. We still have a hard spot right about, let's see exactly where it is, right in the middle here. So wherever we have a hard spot, we can just work it with our little tool. I want to get this roughed in before I put the sandpaper on the fuselage. And that should give us the final little amount. I have really spent a lot of time doing this. Because I really do want to have a nice clean, tight joint here. Again, it's just like anything else. It just takes time to get the fit just right and pick up what is the hard spot right here. Almost every one of these fits, there's almost no substitute for just taking your time. There just isn't a way of just slapping it in. Now, otherwise you'd have a gap that you'd wind up filling with glue or epoxy or CA or something terrible, and that's not what we want to do. I want this fit to be as nice as possible. Just a little bit more, but you're never done. There's always just a little. You always get a little too fussy too. And you can see how much of a curve we've got actually built in there. Real close, hopefully. We only need to have this pressed down on the top. This should pick up really close to what the curve is on the part that's going to matter. Again, you can do this. This is a good way to set a canopy on. Just put the sandpaper on top of the top block, set your canopy. And hopefully a very close fit. But the last little bit I want to get out, same old thing with a piece of 320 sandpaper, even though we've had this on here before. So kind of find a hard spot. Now we're ready to test fit this. You know what I did? I just temporarily hold the tail in place with a piece of tape until I can set it and measure this distance and this distance, and of course I can move the tape back and forth. And then what I'm going to do is just put little dots, tack glue it in place with thick CA. I don't want to have it permanent. I want it to be just temporary in this, so if I get it wrong, I can slice it with a razor and then just go in and reset it. Good way to put a rudder on, even on a Cardinal or something. The rudder really adds, that really makes the plane. It's just tacked in place. What I did, I made a little gauge that I can measure from the top of the rudder to the top. And of course, there's no substitute for your eyeball. Your eyeball is the best that I know. Tip to tip, tip to tip is right on the money. Now we could start to put a glue maybe every inch, just tack it in place so it sits there, and then I can look at it with the tape off and remeasure it. Now we're real satisfied with the way this lined up, and this is going to be just a permanent glue, and then we're going to take it all apart and sand this glue joint down. Just want to make one nice little bead of glue in there. Of course we'll check it when we're done. Constantly checking this rudder because it is such a dominant part of the plane. And by the way, you're probably wondering what happened to our 7,000 Q-tips. We're down to about 1,000. Use these up like they're water. I want the glue to go out over the edge so I get a good bond, and then I will sand that in. That's not a problem. And of course let it sit without kicker. And then we'll take this apart. Once that sets up, I'll check it. Take it all apart and then work that seam with the little sanding polywogs. Now with the rudder in this position, it'll be real easy to sand that fillet out. Once I'm done sanding it out, of course, I'll put some of the primer in with the airbrush, and I'll put it back on the plane and check with my little gauge that I made that I have it at the angle that I want it to be at. But it should be relatively simple now since we've got a decent fit. It shouldn't be a real big problem getting that to be like a final fillet to match, or what I hope is going to match the fillets around the nacelles and things, so they all kind of blend together. Today, huh?
Oh, Jesus, I hope so.
This is the world's record for a set of flaps. You started the one in July or something?
Yeah, but it had to be. Yeah, but what year?
Yeah, well, I don't know.
I'll say one thing. It's labor intensive, but if you...
I think they're going to be real nice.
It makes a good, strong, fairly light flap, so we'll see how they work out.
Anyway, we're table sharing today, but I've got this already ground into the fillet area with the little sanding, this little guy. And this little guy is just a priceless little tool when you want to do that kind of sanding and grinding. And now from this point, I'll lay another thin bead of CA in there, just wipe it down with Q-tips, sand it out, and do that over and over and over until I have the diameter of a fillet that I want to have in there. We're ready to do our airbrush some primer into that joint. Let that dry probably overnight, or at least part of the day, and then put a coat of silver on it. That really sanded out pretty well. How you doing? You're on your next flap? Your flapper-ons there?
Yeah, the second flap is all ready to go down. I'll just have to sand that out and cap the trailing edge. In the meantime, we're going to put on...
We will be in production.
5 minute.
Got me good before. Okay, that's drying up now, up by the heating vent. Leave that an overnight to dry. All our little spots up on here are drying. Chicky! Pooping on a B-20? Oh, like the ball. Oh, Chicky! God, I can't believe it. He takes a dump on my plane. Chicky! This is it. This is it. You're toast. You only live with Ken Clapson and the dogs.
Listen, I'm going to the hardware store. I'm going to go get a cork and stick it.
Chicky, you are in big. If you only knew what trouble you're in. Miss Ashley's getting christened. Chicky, this is supposed to be off limits to you. Yeah, I'll give you What do you have to say for yourself? You need a lawyer. You're gonna need a lawyer, you little bird. Where are you? Now look, you're gonna need a lawyer, I'm telling you.
When are you going to the post office in UPS?
I'm going right now. While this is drying.
I'm going out and move.
We're gonna let this dry while we're out doing our postal UPS.
Make my phone call.
Flapper on. Chicky, you're not my... In this day, believe it or not, Russ finally finished up the flaps. The last one is sitting out there. We had a relatively busy day. What we decided to do is just let everything dry up by the heating vent overnight. Tomorrow when we come down, this should sand out like butter. And anytime you have the luxury of letting something dry overnight, again, the minimum time probably would be an hour or so, but boy, if you have a heating vent and you can leave it up there overnight, it is butter in the morning. So we're going to just leave it there and tomorrow live to fight another day. Now this is great. Luckily, Karen speaks Spanish, so when she gets home I'll have her interpret this. But it looks like, from what I can do, the little Spanish that I speak, I can see that this is from a club in Madrid, and that it's talking about the team selection for the Spanish team. Now what's really cool, the guy who's the highest scoring of the Spanish people, as far as I can read this, is flying a Sukhoi, and he's he's actually just buying a Cardinal kit right now. So, and he left the scores and the various other things. But the nice thing, again, having Karen being able to read this, and she can interpret it for me, but I can already see that Jose Lopez Olivares, and that's the gentleman on top, he is now the lucky owner of a a hand-selected wood cardinal kit. So we hope he enjoys it, has good luck, and he'll be sending us some pictures very soon. Now, unfortunately today, we thought we were going to be able to paint, but it's drizzling, drooling, and raining and everything, so we're going to use this day to detail some more and try to finish up these little touch-up areas that we wanted to work on. Well, really, this stuff has been drying up nicely because we've had the heat on in the house. But the main thing is, one of the things I want to work on this morning right away, I want to get another coat of primer and with some 1200 paper sand out this whole back end. And the back ends of the fillets, they need another coat, maybe 2 coats. So we'll use a rainy day to do what amounts to be some of the touch-ups that we want to get done on this, because we really don't want to, the thing I don't want to do is get to a point where I'm trying to paint on a rainy day or compromising, and somehow it takes the fun out of building when you're in some kind of a rush to do it. But I like to be efficient, but I don't like to rush. Notice what I always do is whenever I do an area with the primer, I always do around the edge, because the edge is what takes a beating. That's what, and there's certainly going to be somebody launching a plane like this somewhere down the road. I want to make sure that's on good and straight. I have the air vent in there. We're ready to sand this down. Even though we're not going to be able to repaint it today, I can do an incredible job of detailing because I have plenty of time to do this now and I'm not under any pressure to finish it. The only other thing I wanted to do today, I wanted to start laying up the tank bodies because it's going to take me 4 days to make each tank. So I want to start that process and get the tanks going because we're coming up on the end of this construction project, and Mike Costello has the masks. He's just got to stop and drop them off. We may be able to start painting, assuming that it stops raining somewhere in the near future. Just some of the little things that seem to help at this point. Once we're in primer and stuff, we don't want to use anything but 1200. I have my little polywogs for getting in the corners, but the first thing I want to do is just see if I can pick up any high spots that have come out on this, and especially along the edges here, because this will be a focal point. A lot of times you can use a day like today where it's raining and clammy and everything. We'll use it to our advantage. Because if it was a nice day, I'd be looking to hurry this up and maybe get some paint on. But because it's the way it's going, it looks like we're going to have 2 to 3 days of plenty of time to detail sand. And every time you detail sand a part like this, it gets nicer than the time before. Every one of these little gouges and areas. Now, what I usually like to do too, let me get my little tool. Again, these tools, as I've said before, so valuable. Keep it soaking wet. Use the tool to work right in that corner. And immediately we'll see the high spots coming up. Now, we put a lot of time the other day into getting this fillet nice, so it would be a nice razor sharp edge, have good definition, and it looks like we've got pretty much exactly what we want. Now, I always wind up working into the fillet, and then of course on this side I want to work down. What I want to try not to do is only go in one direction. Because the next thing I'll do is, unless I find some big flaws, I'll coat this with a coat of silver talc next just to see what this is going to look like. And that I can do even if it's raining. I can just run out in the garage and do that. Now, as always, get the old material away, the liquid material, just get it away. And if you look at this up close, you can see we've got a relatively nice fillet on there. So all I'm going to do is spend probably the better part of today. I'll try to get all my parts ready for the next coat of silver. And hopefully, maybe we'll even get a break in the rain in the next 2 or 3 days. Real happy with the way the rudder worked out. And there should be some tricks and tips on that you can put on any plane. Time I work on sanding a coat of silver like this out and I find any little flaws. Notice how I've got the whole edge primed, but I don't have primer in the middle. It's only on the edges because it's the edges that take a beating and the edges that are going to be difficult to get really perfect without just turning the plane into decoupage with hundreds and hundreds of coats of paint on it. I want to keep that finish as light as possible. Now when I sand out the last coat, what I'm looking for, as I've said probably the last 10 times, the last coat, I'm trying to get the last coat to do this where I just start to see the spots coming through. I don't want to go down the raw wood. I don't want to go down the spots